Good evening. Welcome to Convention of States Indiana Live. Do you think we have a big problem with our federal government? If you do, stay tuned because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Our broadcast host is Dale Parrish. He's the Convention of States Indiana State Director. Take it away, Dale. Good evening.
Well, sorry, folks. I started Maringo Mike over again there. So uh, I hope you enjoyed that introduction. We like having Maringo Mike come in and introduce things for us. So I'll get better at handling him in the future. So sorry about that. Anyway, I want to welcome you to our broadcast this evening. As Maringo Mike indicated, my name's Dale Parrish. I'm the state director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And we want to bring this broadcast to you every week, Monday evenings at 7 o'clock. And we really want to target the broadcast to Hoosiers, to people here in Indiana that maybe are not aware of Convention of States and want to maybe learn more and get involved. And of course, we'll welcome anyone that may be interested in Convention of States. But as I said, we're primarily oriented toward the people here in the state of Indiana, and we want to educate you on Convention of States and keep you up to date as to what are some of the things going on in our organization here in Indiana. We have a great organization. We're a leading state in the country in our movement. So I hope you find these broadcasts interesting. Tonight we have a great broadcast for you. We're starting something kind of new here. We're going to be bringing in a young lady named Debbie Stewart, and Debbie is a homeschool teacher here in Indiana. And Debbie is going to present the first installment in a program called Constitutional Literacy. Now, I'll let her explain more about this when we bring her in, but I hope you find this very interesting. Like I said, this is going to be the first installment of possibly, we think, upwards of 25 installments. So this is going to be going on for some time, and many of us here in Convention of States have been through this program and found it very, very interesting. So I'm anxious and excuse me, I'm excited to go through this again with Debbie and learn more about the Constitution. So we're going to be bringing Debbie on very shortly here. Then, if we have time, then we're going to go into some numbers about how we're doing here in the state of Indiana and in Convention of States. We'll talk about the basics of Convention of States, and then we'll wrap things up. So I also want to mention now, before we get started, that I always like to issue this warning. If in fact your screen would go blank or freeze up, please understand we've encountered a technical problem. And if that does happen, I don't want you to wait around for us to come back on, because it just takes too long for us to get everything up and going again. So please, if that happens, go ahead and sign off and put us on your calendar for next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. So just want to give that warning to you. It's a very pertinent warning at this point in time, because we've already encountered a technical problem earlier this evening. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it doesn't happen again. So without further ado, I want to bring Debbie into the broadcast, and we'll get started on her segment here. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Dale.
All right, glad you could join us this evening. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, Debbie, I kind of laid a little groundwork for you in that introduction, but so I'm just going to let you take it away and get started.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, this is going to be, like Dale said, the first installment of a long series, lots of episodes and chapters on constitutional literacy. And before I actually get into the content, though, I just wanted to cover what I would call kind of the objectives that you would get out of this time. And so for this week, in introducing the Constitution, really, we would like you to recognize the responsibilities of an enlightened citizen. And we're going to talk a little bit about what an enlightened citizen is. But I think that here in America, many of us have lost some of the knowledge that our founding fathers had, and we aren't maybe in tune to what our Constitution actually means. So we want to become enlightened citizens. We also want to be able to identify what I would call 3 elements of constitutional knowledge, and I'll go over those with you in a minute. And then there's 2 kinds of unconstitutional acts, and I just want everybody to make sure they understand what those are. So those are kind of the objectives for this evening.
Okay, great.
Okay, before we get started, though, there's a lot of legal terms and some things in here that maybe need to be kind of defined. So I wanted to go over what these words are that we'll be using. The first one is just what a constitution is, and it's really a body of rules that are established in order to run a government. And here in the United States, it's a written constitution. In Great Britain, it's unwritten. But either way, it really grants power and limits power to the government. Okay. The second thing is something called an ultra vires, and that's Latin. It means beyond the power. And so we're going to talk about how our government has actually gone over the authority and the power they've been given by the Constitution to interfere and even hold back some of our freedoms. And the third thing is the enumerated powers, and those are the 30 specified explicit powers in Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. And so when we use the word enumerated, we're telling you that they are actually written out, handwritten in the Constitution. That's what enumerated means.
Hey, Debbie, just a couple things. First of all, this program that you're presenting, this was we ought to give credit to Michael Ferris, who created this program, right?
Oh, absolutely, and that's what I'm going to get into next. Is Michael Ferris wrote this whole curriculum for high schoolers so they could understand what the Constitution meant. And it actually will kind of anger you when you find out that many of our freedoms are being taken away from us and we don't even know what's happening. Okay. And when we do, it's usually too late. So he spent a lot of time, and he actually did it originally for his teens in his home. And it takes you through many sections of the Constitution, letting you know where are all the areas where the government is really going way beyond their authority and what the impact of that has been. And then he talks about some of the cases involved. And so it's really great that high schoolers can understand this is what the rights that I have in the Constitution, this is what it's all about. This is why we have one. And here's where it's been violated. And that's what we're going to get into next, is some specifics around what we're going to learn through this whole course.
Well, and we want to point out that Michael Ferris was one of the co-founders of Convention of States. So he's played a very, very important role in the movement, Convention of States movement. And I know you mentioned the enumerated powers. Now we've done some broadcasts focusing on enumerated powers. So I'm anxious when you get to that point. That's very, very interesting to really understand that the Constitution really lays out where money can be spent, or what the government has the power to spend money on, and how it's it's actually been abused and over time. So anyway, I won't go any further. I just wanted to make note that enumerated powers is a very, very important topic to us here in Convention of States. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay, because we're going to get, as we get further into these weeks of time that we have together, we're going to spend some time just on those enumerated powers too, the power of Congress. So, okay, so now that I kind of talked about the definitions here, just a little bit of an introduction into this chapter that Michael Ferris did is that we're really talking about, I think sometimes we see the government as the people that are in charge, but really, actually, the way our founding fathers intended it to be, that we the people, and it's right behind you, the curtain behind you, we the people, we are the ones, we set up our government, and we say what the government gets to do and what it doesn't do, and we say when it violates the Constitution. So it's really we the people. The government authority is ordained by us, the people. And sometimes I think we forget that we're in charge. And right?
You are right. You are right. I know it doesn't seem that way, but you are correct. And I think, that's one of the things we hope in a convention of states that maybe that role can be enhanced a great deal through amendments to the Constitution. But you are very, very correct. We the people, we are in charge, actually.
Yes, and that this is part of like a patriotic movement now. People are realizing, oh, these are my rights, and I am in charge, and oh, I can vote people in and vote people out, and I have a say. And so this really is, I think, I don't know how many years you want to go back, but I think as American citizens, we've kind of become ignorant of what our rights are and what our Constitution says. And really, I don't think it's necessarily our fault in that. I'm not sure we're teaching it in the schools, and I'm not sure what's being taught. And if it is being taught, is it truth? Is it really truth? And so that's kind of the whole purpose of this course that Michael Ferris did, was let's get the truth out there and let the people decide.
Okay.
So we have unknowingly allowed some tyranny to happen in our country, where branches and parts of government have been able to go way beyond their authority, and we have allowed for it to happen. And so I'm going to get into now talking about what should we know, what should we do in order to change that. Okay? So the first thing I want to talk about is to be an enlightened citizen. And what does it mean to be an enlightened citizen? Well, there's really two things. First, we need to understand what the Constitution requires of our government. Okay? And then the second thing, understand, well, what is the government doing today based on that? Because it's easy to say one thing, but what are we actually doing with our government? And so once we are become an enlightened citizen, we know what the Constitution says and what people are actually doing in our government. We can either vote them in or vote them out based on whether they are fulfilling their duties. And as an enlightened citizen, we need to know three main things, and these are really important. The first thing would be, these are the three elements of constitutional knowledge that I talked about. One is, what does the Constitution say? Number two, what did the founding fathers mean by what they said? Because original intent is very key. And number three, how has the Supreme Court ruled on cases since the Constitution? And what we're finding is that we know what the Constitution says. We can even find out what the founding fathers meant. But what we're finding is that the way the Supreme Court has been ruling on things has been way off base from what the original intent was. So there's a big gap between numbers 1 and 2 and 3.
The Supreme Court, I think if I recall right, the Supreme Court originally was not supposed to be a significant part of the government, but it's turned out to be a very significant part. And as we know, in some cases, like you said, gone kind of off track, off from what the Constitution had intended to say. So
Well, absolutely. I mean, that branch really is supposed to interpret the law, but they're actually legislating some laws, and
Right.
they're being involved in some of the executive branch and vice versa. So there's a lot of people aren't staying within their enumerated powers.
Right. Right.
So that's really what we want to become, enlightened citizens. And we shouldn't be defining the Constitution by Supreme Court decisions. We should only be using those prior Supreme Court decisions, which are called precedents, in light of the Constitution. So all the decisions on the Supreme Court should be going back to the original intent of the Constitution. And that is not happening. Okay, so really I would like to, that leads us right into what is the purpose of a Constitution? And so really, if you look at the preamble, which is the introduction to the Constitution, it states 6 things, and I'm going to read those. If I say them from memory, I may chop them up. So the first is to form a more perfect union. The second is to establish justice. The third is to ensure domestic tranquility. Fourth, provide for the common defense. Fifth, promote the general welfare. And sixth, to secure the blessings of liberty to us and our children or our posterity. So really the purpose of a constitution is to grant power to the government, limits the government, and it secures the people's rights. And so that is the purpose of a constitution. Only the government can be unconstitutional. Citizens cannot violate the Constitution. Only the government can.
Right.
That was a huge eye-opener for me when I first started studying this. I was like, oh my goodness, that makes sense.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So then it moves us to the next part is we want to talk about unconstitutional acts. And there are really 2 unconstitutional acts. The first one is when when the government acts beyond their authority. We call that the ultra vires, that Latin word that means beyond the authority. And the second is when the government can violate a person's constitutional rights. So they can act beyond their authority, but they can also violate a right. So I'll give you an example. Let's just say something was happening at my neighbor's house that looked bad. I could always call the police, and the police have the authority to go to that home. But if they break down the doors, they've just violated the constitutional rights of the people who live there. So there's always those 2 things to ask. There's 2 questions to ask. Did the government have the appropriate authority to do that? And if they did they violate anyone's rights? So those are our 2 unconstitutional acts.
Okay.
I'm trying to clear out these notifications I'm getting. Sorry about that.
Oh, was that on your computer? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know how to stop those forever. And then, so we've talked about what to know and do, being an enlightened citizen, the purpose of the Constitution, the 2 main unconstitutional acts, and then just some important people to touch on. James Madison was really big. James Madison was the father of the Constitution. When they met at the Constitutional Convention, he came up with the Virginia Plan, and he was huge in working the Virginia Plan into the U.S. Constitution. He helped draft the Bill of Rights. He was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers. So James Madison was huge in this whole process of writing the Constitution.
I think isn't he considered? Isn't he called the father of the Constitution? Is that
father of the Constitution?
Yeah. Yeah. He played a big role. Yes.
Yes, he did. And then he was also the one, there were some of the states said that they would not ratify it until there were a Bill of Rights in there. And so he promised them, I'll get them in there. And he did.
Yeah.
So, and then the other man is Alexander Hamilton. And he also was part of writing the Federalist Papers. He was one of the co-authors. He was signed the Constitution also and formed the Federalist Party. So he was a big part of getting the new Constitution ratified.
Now, I think if I remember right, I think Madison and Hamilton kind of differed on some things, didn't they? And they kind of
they did, yes. He didn't fully trust the Constitution. He was a little bit leery on that side. So yes, they differed, and but they did work together on the Federalist Papers to get the state of New York to ratify.
Right. Okay.
The Constitution. Good. And then really wrapping this whole thing up, just kind of a conclusion is that we need to remember that the government does not have the authority to do everything. We need to understand their limits. And we are the people that helped, our founding fathers wrote those limits into the Constitution. And we need to become enlightened citizens. We need to understand what's happening in our government. We need to understand what our Constitution says and what it meant to the founding fathers. Because since then, there's been many groups of people that have tried to twist that and turn that and make it look like what they want it to look like. But really, even if you can't understand it in the Constitution or you're not sure, you can go back to things like the Federalist Papers, when they had the state ratifying constitutions. All of those have all the documentation that tells us exactly what the founding fathers meant.
Right. You know, I have a book on called the Federalist Papers, and it's very, very helpful to refer to that from time to time on specific topics. I have to admit, I did get a book that kind of explains or kind of does the Federalist Papers in today's language, because I find it very, very difficult to follow the original language of our founding fathers and that period of time. But
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. Yeah.
And really, just to sum up, the true threat to our freedoms in America is when Congress acts out of their authority. And so we need to be able to know when they're doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Right, Deb. Well, we plan on having you back on November 18th for your next installment. You want to talk a little bit about what that next installment's going to be about?
Sure. Let me just remember here where we're at. I'm gonna look over there because yes, we're gonna talk about Article 1, Section 1. Basically, we're gonna talk about the legislative branch.
Okay.
And yes, only Congress has the power to make laws, and we've gotten really far away from that.
We sure have, haven't we? Yeah.
Yes.
You sure can't the president make a law or the Supreme Court make a law or
well,
we're not supposed to, are they?
No, they're not. They found ways around that in so many, and if we don't hold them accountable, they'll just keep doing that. So somehow we have got to take the power and authority that we have as citizens and start holding them accountable.
All right, Deb. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, and it was a joy to be here.
And we'll see you November 18th.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dale.
Good night. All right. Okay. Well, good. I hope you found that very interesting. I think Debbie does a great job on presenting that, and I think we're going to have a very, very educational series here with her on our Constitution. So I want to thank her very much for that. Okay, I'm going to bring up my my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to just go over. We're not going to get into the basics tonight. I think what we'll do is we'll just, if I can get this initiated here, we'll just go over some of the numbers about what's going on in our state. And I'm going to expand the screen here so that everyone can get a good view of what I'm going to present here. So the first thing I want to talk about with regard to our state is some of the resources that we have available to us here in the state of Indiana. And the first resource, and probably the main one, is our national website, conventionofstates.com. Now this, as I said, this is a national website, has a wealth of information in this website. Might also mention that on the back end of the website is a huge database that we use for administrative purposes. But for those of you that want to learn more about Convention of States and get involved, the first step that you should take is to go to this website, conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, open an account, and get involved with us. Now, embedded in that national website is our state website page, which would be conventionofstates.com/Indiana. And that, of course, then is a little more focused look on our state of Indiana. Social media platforms, Facebook, we're on Facebook, Convention of States, Indiana. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is coming to you through that Facebook page. So our state Facebook page, Convention of States, Indiana. YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, COS, Indiana. Now that YouTube channel is very much and primarily an educational resource where we have a number of narrated PowerPoint presentations. We have recordings of these broadcasts that we're doing. We also have links to a podcast that our legislative liaison, Paul Phillips, who you maybe have seen in previous broadcasts, we have him on here regularly. But Paul does a podcast called The Free to Be Free. And whenever he generates a podcast, we always find a way to set up a link on our YouTube channel to those podcasts. They're very, very good. We use them frequently as resource material here for our broadcast. So I would encourage you to look into those on our YouTube channel. We're on Twitter, hashtag COS Indiana, Instagram, Convention of States, Indiana. We're on LinkedIn. And so we're on social media platforms all over, and you should easily be able to find us. All right, just some quick numbers on our state. In 2018, we surpassed 30,000 supporters in the state of Indiana, been growing tremendously in the state. So we set for our goal in 2019 of 40,000, and we're closing in on that number. Hope we make it. Well, it's going to be close, but we're closing in, I think, on the 40,000 target for 2019. About 2,900 volunteers. These are people that have indicated a willingness to help should we need some help from time to time. We have about 40 individuals in leadership roles. Now, this is a very important part. If you have any inclination or any desire to get involved in Convention of States here in Indiana at any level, then I would encourage you, here's this website again, go to this national website, conventionofstates.com, click on the menu selection, Take Action, scroll down and look at the various volunteer opportunities that we have. Read about if there's one that's of interest to you, open it up, read some more about it. And if you're really interested, go ahead and make application. Now that you're not obligated in any way here, but go ahead and make application. Your name then comes up on a report that I see and a few others, and one of us then will be in contact with you to discuss further your interest in that particular position. We need leaders. We need people in leadership positions. So I encourage you and encourage you to go to the website, conventionofstates.com. Click on Take Action and look at the different positions that we have available. Okay, well, tonight we're not going to go into the basics. We'll hold that for our next broadcast. Let me see who we got joining us tonight. Well, there's James Cressy again. James has, I believe he's from Missouri. He seems to be a regular on our broadcast. So, James, good to see you again. And I see, I guess probably that's it. James is the only one. Okay. Well, I want to start wrapping things up here. And I want to tell you now that our next broadcast is going to be next Monday evening, October 28th. And we're going to be talking about a program that we have here in Indiana, and it's called the Patriot Pin. Now, this is an award that we give out to individuals here in Convention of States in Indiana that have gone above and beyond what was expected of them, and they've really, really become a team player and really have taken on a lot of responsibility. So we try to recognize people as much as possible here in the state, and we've issued a number of these pins. And when I say a Patriot pin, it's literally a pin that you can attach to your clothing. And so we're going to have 3 individuals. We've issued a number of these, but I'm going to bring on 3 individuals that have received the Patriot pin here in Indiana. And those individuals will be George Ward, our grassroots coordinator, Ken Kashuba, our state communications coordinator, and John Ackerman, our media liaison. So these 3 individuals will join me. And yes, we're going to have on the screen here, we're going to have 4 people at one time. I've never done that, so this will be a first for me. But we're going to have 4 people at one time, and we'll be talking about the Patriot Pin Award and inform you as to why these individuals were 3 of the individuals deserving of this award. So, having said that, we'll wrap things up here. And as I always do, I like to talk about the quote that I'm so fond of. And this is a quote from another of our co-founders, Mark Meckler, who's currently the president of Convention of States. But Mark says that has always said that there's a fundamental question facing our country. And that fundamental question is not what should we do? The fundamental question is who decides. And just like Debbie said in her segment on the Constitution, it's we the people. We the people should have a stronger and larger say-so in what happens and what is decided in our country. So the question facing us is, in fact, a 2-word question, very simply, who decides? And in Convention of States, we believe in we the people. So everyone, thank you for joining us this evening, and put us on your calendar, please, for next Monday evening on the 28th of October, and we'll see you then. So good night. Have a good evening.